Muito obrigado aos participantes desse painel. Nós vamos imediatamente iniciar, então, o painel 6. O que significa ter um conselho e diretoria diversa? Como as áreas de pessoas que tratam de D&I e RI devem se posicionar em relação a esses temas? Então, quero convidar para participar desse painel Ana Guimarães, presidente do Conselho Consultivo 30% Club, o Fernando Luciano Pereira, diretor de gestão de pessoas da Vivo, e também Ivan Gafuri, diretor de ESG Benchmark na SP Global Sustainable. Nós teremos uma palestra em idioma estrangeiro, acho que em inglês, portanto, se alguém precisar de tradução simultânea, os aparelhinhos estão lá na porta do auditório, tá bom? Por favor. Então já vou passar a palavra para a nossa moderadora desse painel, que é a Ana Guimarães. Ana, tudo bem com você? A Ana vai moderar esse painel, então bom trabalho, Ana.
Tá, obrigada. Tudo bem? Nice to meet you too. Vamos começar? Vamos começar? Tá.
Por favor.
Tá. Bom dia a todos. Nós temos um desafio grande, né? Porque nós somos o último painel e eu acho que vai ser bastante interessante. Bom, para começar, gostaria de falar Peraí, só um pouquinho. Foram tantas mudanças, a gente ia ter mais uma palestrante, mas ela teve um problema de saúde da última hora e não vai poder participar, então a gente teve que reformular todo o nosso painel. Bom, então, gostaria de agradecer aí a presença de todos, a oportunidade de nós estarmos aqui, a Abrasca e ao IBRE, parabenizá-lo pela 25ª edição e agradecer aí o Fernando e o Ivan Gafuri por estarem aqui conosco. Bom, gostaria de me apresentar, sou Ana Guimarães, sou presidente do Conselho do 30% Club. Fiz mestrado em engenharia no ITA e MBA na USP. Fui CEO durante 9 anos de companhias da área automotiva. E há 10 anos atrás eu entrei nessa área de governança corporativa, porque como CEO eu queria entender aí como era o outro lado da mesa, né, que eu respondia aos acionistas. Gostei bastante dessa posição, dessa atuação, e em 2019 eu recebi o convite do 30% Club Global, que nasceu no Reino Unido, para conduzir a Operação Brasil. Com isso, no ano passado, a gente instituiu um prêmio chamado 30% Club Award, que é inédito aí nos 20 capítulos que nós temos. Bom, antes da gente iniciar as perguntas, gostaria que o Ivan Gafuri se apresentasse. Por favor. Could you introduce yourself?
Perfect. Yes. A warm welcome to everyone, also from my side. I'm Ivan. I work for S&P Global Switzerland, so I'm based out of Zurich. So pardon me for not speaking Portuguese, although I understand a little. And basically, I'm part of S&P Global Sustainable One, which is the part of S&P where all the methodologies around corporate sustainability are included. So we have one methodology that might be known by the company also here in Brazil, which is called Corporate Sustainability Assessment. This methodology is also used then for defining and selecting what are the companies that enter in the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices that many of the investor relations may be familiar with. And besides that, there are also other methodologies to track what are the environmental footprint, climate change alignment, and so on. and so on. So basically, this is where we are. What I do within S&P Global Sustainable One, I'm part of the team which is called Sustainability Benchmarking Services. So based on the outcomes of those of the assessment, of the corporate sustainability assessment, we are able to provide corporates mainly analysis to better understand where they are positioned compared to the expected practice of the methodology, but also to compare themselves with other peers in the industry or around the world. So today I do a bit this introduction, was I might mention some numbers that are coming out from these statistics. In terms of background, maybe quickly, then I give the word also to my colleague here. I studied economics. I did for 10 years financial analysis and portfolio management, and then I switched, so basically integrating or trying at least to integrate sustainability information into models for evaluating companies. So that's the reason why the methodology also now of the corporate sustainability assessment is very close to the market expectation that it was created with this purpose, basically to structure sustainability information in a way that can be used for taking better informed investment decisions.
Okay, Ivan, it's our pleasure. Thank you for joining us in this panel. Fernando, please.
Olá, todo mundo. Boa tarde, um prazer estar aqui. Eu sou Fernando Luciano, formado em comunicação social, tenho pós-graduação em gestão estratégica de marketing, gestão estratégica de pessoas. Trabalhei por mais de 15 anos nas áreas de negócios, serviços digitais, na Vivo. E nos últimos 6 anos fiz uma migração de carreira, fui para a área de pessoas, então liderei a diretoria de talentos e agora lidero a diretoria de gestão de pessoas. Sou responsável por estrutura, organização, estratégia de remuneração, bem-estar, employer branding, cultura e diversidade.
Muito bom. Bom, Fernando, vamos para a primeira pergunta. O 30% Club, ele é voltado aos países do G20, tem por objetivo promover 30% de conselheiras nos colegiados dos conselhos de administração das companhias que fazem parte do IBEST 100. No ano passado, nós instituímos aqui no Brasil a premiação 30% Club Award, e 17 companhias foram premiadas com essa premiação. Uma das 17 foram M. Dias Branco e Vivo. Então, minha pergunta é para o Fernando. Fernando, como é que foi a premiação? Conta um pouquinho para nós aí e o que isso significou para a Vivo. E nós temos a nossa premiação, sempre vai ocorrer no dia 30 de outubro. Então, gostaria de saber se a Vivo vai receber o prêmio dia 30 de outubro de 2024 também.
Com certeza, o nosso compromisso receber o prêmio. Para a gente, diversidade e inclusão fazem parte dos valores da companhia. E aí eu convido vocês a visitarem uma loja da Vivo ou a receberem técnicos em suas casas ou reparadores, instaladores ou até visitar os nossos escritórios na Eco Berrini, aqui em São Paulo, na Chucre Zaidan ou em algumas das nossas regionais. A gente vê a diversidade com os olhos, isso é visível. E a gente acredita muito também que a diversidade a gente precisa refletir, né, o que a sociedade vive dentro da própria empresa. Então, quanto mais diverso a gente a gente acredita que consegue oferecer um ambiente mais colaborativo, isso gera criatividade, isso acaba gerando também sustentabilidade para o negócio da Vivo. Quando a gente olha para o prêmio 30% Club Brasil, a gente percebe que é o reconhecimento de um trabalho que vem sendo feito há muitos anos. A gente hoje tem 33% de participação feminina no nosso conselho. Dos 12 conselheiros, a gente tem 4 que são mulheres. 86% são conselheiros independentes. E, para além do conselho, a gente tem hoje 45% de mulheres fazendo parte do nosso headcount. 33,7% são executivas, mulheres executivas, gerente sênior, diretoras, vice-presidentes. Mais de 400 mulheres que a gente chama de fibra, que são mulheres que estão atuando em áreas técnicas que antes eram sempre ocupadas por homens. Então, todos esses percentuais mostram uma realidade que a gente já vem trabalhando há muitos anos. E eu espero que o 30% Club Brasil inspire outras empresas a atuarem da mesma forma.
Com certeza, né? O IBET 100 são 100 companhias, né? 17 companhias. Bom, mas enfim, a gente começou a fazer o Bird Women Index há 3 anos atrás, éramos 8,5% em 2020 e 2022 já éramos 20%, 2023 20%, já houve um avanço. E a nossa visão é ter 30% até 2026. Mas, Fernando, aproveitando o gancho aí da sua pergunta, vocês, pelo que você falou, você já tem um pipeline aí de vice-presidentes mulheres que estariam prontas aí também para fazer parte do conselho da Vivo. E você tem alguma estratégia como diretor de pessoas de preparar em termos de formação de governança corporativa essas vice-presidentes?
Tem, na verdade a gente trabalha desde a base, né, Ana? A gente tem programas de desenvolvimento para os diferentes pilares de diversidade que a gente atua. Então, a gente atua formalmente, oficialmente, com 4 pilares: gênero, raça, pessoas com algum tipo de deficiência e pessoas da comunidade LGBTI+. Então, a gente tem programas de desenvolvimento específico para cada um dos pilares. Para mulheres, especificamente, além dos programas de desenvolvimento, mentoring, coaching, dos programas de desenvolvimento específicos das suas áreas de competências técnicas específicas ou de soft skills, a gente também trabalha fortemente com a gestão dos nossos talentos. Então, a gente tem um processo muito robusto em que a gente faz anualmente de identificação de talentos, de definição do pool de talentos, e aí a gente começa a desenvolver e a trabalhar essas mulheres especificamente. Sempre quando tem uma oportunidade dentro da companhia, seja numa área específica em que essa mulher está trabalhando ou em áreas cross da companhia, a gente leva em consideração esses perfis que a gente já identificou. Isso parece algo corriqueiro, mas avança muito nas decisões, nas definições, e a gente acredita que está oferecendo mais oportunidades para as mulheres nesse sentido.
Muito bom, parabéns. Então. Bom, já uma pergunta para o Fernando aí da audiência. Gostaria de saber qual a visão da Vivo a respeito das mulheres que são mães. Por que as empresas brasileiras adotam jornada de trabalho de meio período para essas mulheres?
A gente lançou recentemente, ou relançou, né, porque a gente retrabalhou muito depois da pandemia nos temas de saúde e bem-estar. A gente relançou no ano passado um programa que a gente chama de Vivo Mais Família, em que a gente vem acompanhando as mulheres gestantes, também mulheres não gestantes, mas que adotaram filho, que tomaram a decisão de ampliar a família, e a gente vem oferecendo algumas oportunidades para essas mulheres, seja na preparação, quando a gente oferece o melhor plano de saúde, o melhor acompanhamento de médico, seja trabalhando com a equipe, com a liderança, seja definindo junto com o líder dela qual a avaliação de performance dela naquele momento, porque muitas vezes o que a gente vê com dados de mercado é que no retorno das mães da licença parental, a performance muda, e a gente não consegue entender o porquê, né? Porque ela acabou de chegar, por que não considerar a mesma avaliação de performance anterior? A única mudança que foi feita foi a ausência dela durante 6 meses, 4, 5, 6 meses, em função do filho. Então, a gente vem trabalhando isso e eliminando alguns vieses e acompanhando, inclusive, percentual de saída dessas mulheres quando retornam da licença parental. A gente hoje tem percentuais melhores do que os percentuais do mercado, mas a gente ainda quer muito mais.
Muito bom. Bom, vamos agora para o Ivan. Ivan, considering the Dow Jones Sustainable World Index is the first international sustainability benchmark index launched in 1999, could you share with us the most relevant success case related to diversity, and what are the 3 most relevant questions related to diversity that are perceived by the investors?
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Yes, indeed. So the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is existing on the market since 1999. And the methodology behind it, so basically the corporate sustainability assessment that is used to assess the company also on the diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, it was created 4 years before, therefore in 1995, really with this intention. I can state that from the beginning, there were already indicator asked, so in terms of diversity. We start, first of all, diversity within the board. That was a topic that we touched before. Then we move a bit so further, looking at diversity on the social part, not from the governance perspective, but diversity in terms of employee and workforce. This is also a topic improvement. Indicators that were mentioned before are also the ones that are covered now in the corporate sustainability assessment. And then I would like also to mention a third element that is very important also is like the proof of the nine, as we say in Italian, of implementing everything, also considering the gender pay gap. So basically we see that sometime, you know, although in terms of policy and then implementation of them, everything is fine. But at the end, if we look at the pay statistics by the different level of responsibility and within the organization, there are still a lot of differences. These change a bit from country to country, but there is still a lot to do. So let's say in terms of relevance of all the diversity and inclusion criteria, we might come up, if we sum up, it differs a bit from industry to industry, but let's say in terms of scoring of a company, in terms of sustainability, I would say between 15 and 20% of the weight is really dependent on those parameters.
50%?
It is
wow.
very high. If we count on governance, for instance, in terms of corporate governance, which is a criterion where we cover, besides the diversity, also the other topic like the remuneration policy, the composition of the board in terms of skill and experiences. We look also at the level of compensation for the CEO in order to ensure a long-term performance. I would say the two questions on diversity, therefore board diversity policy and the effective gender representation in the board, they count already 30% of this criterion in corporate governance, which usually the weight of the corporate governance criteria on the overall assessment is, let's say, between 8 and 9%. So you can calculate that it makes already just the board level diversity, it makes up to 2 to 3% of the total scoring of a company. This is very important. Then if we go down more on the social part, where we have the labor practice indicator, talent attraction and retention, and then human capital development. Also there we have in each of those questions, I will mention it later, all the parameters on how diversity is included in the calculation of those indicators. Just do an example. If you look at the engagement of the employees, of course the main focus is to measure how engaged are your employees as a company. But it would also make sense to break down to statistics by some diversity indicator. It might be gender, it might be age, it might be management, not management, it might be ethnicity, race, nationality. That it might be that the picture, although the average value might say something, if we look then broken down by diversity, we might have a different picture for certain groups. That maybe is not the same pattern. And then maybe to add on it as why it is important, why, you know, the topic is really material. So in the corporate sustainability assessment, we include only the topic where we see a certain level of materiality measured by the classical two-dimension of materiality now. So basically on one side, the impact that the element, the topic has on the value creation for the company, for the industry, and then secondly now, so since 2 years, so basically also the external impact on the society. So it might be easy to figure out that those topics of diversity, maybe they might have a higher impact now on external one on the society, but also on the other axis, so basically they matter a lot in terms of generating financial performance, let's say in terms of profit and loss statement. as you might assume that, having motivated employees that feel well at work, so they might be more innovative, more productive, and so on. This is, and this is something, if the company managed to convey it to the external world and to the capital market, that is the focus of today, investors are very receptive to all the information that relates to value creation. So if we look at in general more so the diversity and inclusion topic, where do we see the value? I mentioned before, okay, on the innovation capability, where does it go? The capability to be innovative, it goes on the revenues. Revenues, it is an element that it is considered by investors when they are modeling the expected return of a company. Having employees that feels well within the company also has an impact on the turnover rate, for instance. So basically, you can confirm me, but you have all these indicators. What does it mean, a high turnover rate for a company now in terms of financial? It means that you have to replace employees more frequently. It means that you have additional costs for looking, for searching, or even for developing talents that are living in-house. So you have a lot of investment that are related with a turnover rate that I do not say that company have to strive to a low turnover rate, but business model of the company change. Sometimes an employee turnover rate is welcome in order to adapt the skills that you have within the company. But if we look at in a stable condition, only taking into account a company that maybe is not so engaging on the diversity topic, a high turnover rate represents a cost that impacts the profitability of the company. And this is also a measure that investors are looking at when you evaluate the company. The third elements that came out some years ago, especially in the United States, with all the movement, Black Lives Matter, and so on, also on the reputational side. Nowadays, there are certain elements of the corporate sustainability that besides the impacts on financial, they have a very strong impact on the society. And then it's quite risky, I would say, for a company not being aware of these different perceptions that the society might have on a topic and just ignoring or not dealing. Right? Once a reputational issue is now on this topic, diversity, inclusion, for instance, but also we can also put in human rights, supply chain management, and so on, and so on, and so on, then it takes a lot of time to fix it. So basically, the impact on reputation on the capital market is that creates an uncertainty. So basically, an investor doesn't know anymore what should I believe. So the company tells me we have of the policy in place to manage human rights. Now I'm expanding a bit the topic, but it's very similar. All the policy in place, but the fact tell me something else. And then this insecurity for the capital market, usually it is not good, but then, usually either they don't invest, so basically directly, so basically you are excluded from a company is excluded from the investment universe, or they put a higher risk premium on it. Therefore, it means that, the future return of a company are discounted with that average, with a higher interest rate or weighted average cost of capital, so that the actual value of this investment is much lower than the other one. So the transmission mechanism to the capital market, although on the opportunity side, is a bit difficult to make it explicit, but on the risk side, it's very straightforward and impactful.
Okay. So we have 8 companies in the Dow Jones Sustainable Index. What do you think that they should pay attention to diversity and inclusion, and how we are going to have more Brazilian companies in these indexes?
Okay, now it is a broader question here. So let's start maybe with the first part. So basically, again, the index that Sanne is mentioning is the direct translation of the outcome of the corporate sustainability assessment. As the score that a company gets out of the corporate sustainability assessment is the only parameter used to define are you part or not to that index. It's an index in the capital market language is a best-in-class index. We define for each industry, for instance, for the world one, only the top 10% in terms of sustainability performance can enter that index, only the 10% of the company. So in this respect, what does it mean for the topic on diversity, equity, inclusion? I can do the list. It means having, first of all, on the governance side, having, let's say, a board nomination policy that also includes the parameter of gender diversity and then other diversities, such as ethnicity, nationality, and race. Why it is important? Why it means that when you propose basically a candidate to be part of the board of directors, in the screening that are done on capability, skill, and so on, you also take into account those parameters. Okay. In some country, you move a bit forward, and you have a threshold, and you say, okay, you have to have within the board, France is one leader in Europe, setting to those thresholds. Here is not setting a threshold, but setting you have to consider also this parameter. And then the second element in terms of board and governance, it is indeed having a certain level of women in the board. We set the threshold for the best score between 40 and 60% of women representation. So 30%, let's say, it is the highest value that we see on average. So by region, Brazil, we are 16%. I checked again yesterday, more or less, so doing the average. We have some industry a bit higher, some industry a bit lower. But, you know, we are between, let's say, 20 and 14%, so the average makes 16%. I'm taking, when I'm talking, maybe just a precision on Brazilian number, you know, so I took the company that actively answer to the corporate sustainability assessment that are 75 companies in Brazil. We also assess more companies in Brazil, so we are up to 150, 200 companies, 200 Brazilian companies that are assessed. And when I told to the breakdown of the other region in total, I considered the company again that answer to the corporate sustainability assessment directly. Those are worldwide 3,500 companies. In total, again, in the database, you know, now, so the investors that are interested, so this information is fully available on the S&P platform downstairs. You have the demonstration if you want to see a bit. In general, we cover 13,000 companies in terms of sustainability performance that we have data. So the governance. Then beside the governance, to going back to the first part of the question, of course, there are all the aspects on the social part, so basically labor practice indicator, besides monitoring and then checking that the company are able to track so the percentage of women, now talking about gender diversity, for the different positions within the company, and also setting target is very important. Then we have also discrimination harassment policy that we can be put in this pool, how diversity then really enforce or enhance the things. And then we have all what it was mentioned before, all the policy to ensure that, especially, you know, to guarantee that a woman in this case can do career when it gets family growing and so on, to have the support services also for facilitating this.
Okay, thank you. So the Brazilian companies that nowadays belong to the Dow Jones Sustainable Index are Lojas Renner, Klabin, Petrobras, Bradesco, Banco do Brasil, Itaú e CEMIG. Parabéns. Bom, Fernando, do you want to make some comments or to ask some questions to Ivan before we go to the next question?
I believe he was very complete in his answer, so
por favor, conta para nós quais são as iniciativas de diversidade e inclusão que estão sendo implementadas aí na Vivo e em quais delas tem a sua contribuição pessoal.
A gente, recentemente, semana passada, teve um evento Vivo ESG Day, que foi apresentado pelo CEO da Vivo. A gente comunicou para o mercado a antecipação de algumas metas que a gente tem. Então, trazendo para mim, do ponto de vista de pessoas, eu acho que o nosso grande papel é influenciar as lideranças da companhia. A gente acredita que as lideranças são capazes de acelerar a mudança de comportamento e são capazes de transformar de forma mais acelerada a companhia. Então, o que a gente vai fazer de forma concreta? A gente tem hoje, como eu comentei antes, 37,8% de mulheres em cargos de liderança, mulheres executivas. O que a gente quer fazer é ter pelo menos 45% de mulheres executivas até 2035. Quando a gente olha para o recorte de mulheres diretivas, que a gente considera diretoras e vice-presidentes, hoje a gente tem 32,5% e a gente quer ter 40% até 2035. Isso no pilar de gênero. E quando a gente olha para o pilar racial, hoje a gente tem 42% de colaboradores que se autodeclaram pretos e pardos, e o que a gente quer é ter 45% desses colaboradores até 2035. E quando a gente olha para a camada de lideranças, hoje a gente tem 33,1% de colaboradores pretos e pardos como líderes da Vivo, e aqui a gente considera coordenadores, supervisores, gerentes sêniores, diretores, vice-presidentes. A gente quer ter 40% até 2035.
E conta para nós, qual foi o programa de maior impacto que conseguiu ter esses belíssimos números aí? O que você considera que seja mais relevante?
Olhando para trás, a gente acabou de completar Grupo Telefônica 100 anos de atuação no mundo, né, como Grupo Telefônica. Aqui no Brasil, são 25 anos de compromisso que a Vivo tem. E quando a gente pensa em compromisso, a gente não quer só gerar valor para os acionistas da companhia, a gente quer gerar um impacto positivo para os colaboradores, suas famílias, para a sociedade, para o planeta. Nesse sentido, 6 anos atrás, 2018, a gente lançou o programa Vivo Diversidade, que atua nesses 4 pilares que eu te comentei, e a gente segue mensalmente os indicadores. A gente tem um dashboard em que a gente compartilha todos os meses com o comitê executivo, sempre na primeira quarta-feira do mês, religiosamente a gente está lá apresentando os avanços, e é muito legal porque a gente vem letrando o comitê executivo e, consequentemente, a gente vem letrando a companhia com relação à diversidade. E a gente vem fazendo isso de uma forma muito humilde e muito consistente, porque a gente sabe que é uma jornada, a gente sabe que não sabe tudo, que precisa aprender, que precisa desaprender, precisa ter novos comportamentos, novos vocabulários, porque às vezes a gente ainda escorrega numa expressão ou noutra, numa afirmação ou noutra, e é muito interessante a forma como a gente vem fazendo, porque a gente consegue, inclusive, levar essa discussão para fora da empresa, para as nossas famílias. Então, quando eu estou no café da manhã, no jantar com meu filho, com a minha esposa, a gente fala sobre, e é impressionante como as gerações que estão vindo já vêm letradas. É muito interessante isso, não só pelo meu filho que tem 17 anos, mas também com os jovens talentos que a gente coloca dentro da Vivo, jovens aprendizes, estagiários, trainees. É muito impressionante e gratificante a postura que eles têm em relação à diversidade e inclusão. Eles dizem, para que discutir isso? A gente só precisa respeitar. Mas como a gente tem diferentes gerações dentro da companhia convivendo entre si, hoje 10% do headcount da Vivo é 50 a mais. A média de idade da Vivo é 35 anos, mais ou menos. Então tem muita gente jovem, mas também tem gente maior, mais experiente, e o que a gente vem fazendo é letrar a companhia como um todo. E todo mês a gente leva um tema diferente para discutir dentro dos 4 pilares que a gente está abordando. A gente já discutiu temas geracionais, a gente agora recentemente discutiu mulheres em cargos de vice-presidente, etc., em cargos de tecnologia, que a gente também está apostando forte nisso, porque a gente se entende não só como uma empresa de telecom, mas também como uma empresa de varejo, como uma empresa de tecnologia, e por que não acelerar a entrada, a ascensão, o desenvolvimento dessas mulheres em áreas tech, digital, e é muito legal fazer isso, é muito legal ver o compromisso dos 9 vice-presidentes que a gente tem, do CEO da Vivo nesse tema, e esse compromisso vai para a empresa inteira, porque a gente tem 110 diretorias, então estão as 110 diretorias trabalhando nisso. A gente tem o que a gente chama de roadshow de diversidade. Uma vez ao ano a gente vai em cada diretor, com seus gerentes sêniores, suas equipes, e a gente passa indicador por indicador e compartilha metas e mostra um farol de como é que está a companhia, de como é que está aquela área, a gente compara. Então, é uma experiência muito legal que vai reverberando para os times como um todo. É óbvio que a gente não é perfeito, é óbvio que a gente tem situações que a gente chega a não acreditar que ainda acontecem dentro da companhia, mas a gente consegue atuar com mais eficiência e de forma mais rápida. E a gente já consegue também, desenvolvendo novos padrões de recrutamento e seleção, identificar pessoas que têm o perfil que a gente quer, que estão dentro dessa cultura diversa, colaborativa, que a gente quer construir para a Vivo. Então, a gente está muito preocupado, não só em trabalhar com quem a gente já tem ali, são 33 mil colaboradores direto na Vivo, mas também trabalhar com quem está chegando, porque a gente entende que a gente precisa ser incansável. É uma jornada que não vai acabar, é uma jornada que tem um longo percurso por aí, mas a gente é forte e determinado para continuar.
E parabéns. E eu fiquei bastante contente conversando com o Eduardo Navarro, né, que é o presidente do Conselho de Administração da Vivo, dizendo que realmente ele deseja, hoje, estão em 33% de conselheiras, e ele quer caminhar para a paridade total, que é 50%. Né? Então, nós e o 30% Club agradecemos a essa postura. Bom, vamos partir para uma próxima pergunta. Ivan, if you consider diversity and inclusion indicators, what the company should pay attention in order to follow the evolution regarding these issues?
Yes, thank you for the question. Here there's a lot of things that have to be considered that the company should consider as in terms of indicator, but also in the way that this topic is addressed. So maybe I would mention the first point is on the awareness. So basically being aware that basically the company is not an island. So basically it is exposed to changes. Those changes are coming first internal, where the company is also a set of diverse people that are working within the company, and it has to be recognized, first of all. Secondly, we have to extend it also to the value chain. So basically the company is not just working itself, you also have supplier, you have clients, and supplier and clients are also diverse. And then we have a tendency and trends outside of the company that are changing. I was mentioning before the perception of certain topics that change over time due to events or due to behaviors or due to other things. And this is very important also to be aware. Once the awareness is there, also to capture also basically what is available in the company and what's happening outside of the company, then usually the first step is starting to set policy and commitment. So basically, basically analyzing what does it mean for me, so this changing, why is it important? So finding out, also to use the words that they use at the beginning, the materiality of the topic for the company. And then once this materiality is defined, then we start, okay, we need the normative part. So basically we need to set some expectation and policy how to deal with it. We need to use commitments. For instance, in terms of commitment, the important things with all the social aspect, not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also for other elements, is that they have to be formulated not so aspirational, they don't help a lot, but really in a binding form. So we see it also sometimes in the Human Rights Committee, we recognize that it's not enough. We recognize that, and therefore we analyze what does it mean for the company. We decided to act this way and then to set this commitment. The same is valid for diversity, equity, inclusion. We see it also for discrimination, harassment policies sometimes. All the companies, they have those policies, but then if we look how they are formulated, sometimes it's like an addition to the code of conduct. We also consider that, without saying, how serious is the company dealing with this topic.
So what we are trying to say to us that the commitment is important to put it in action also.
Yes.
It's just not saying in the papers, but to put in action these characteristics also.
Correct.
Okay.
So basically, a strong commitment is always a good start for
Okay.
things. And then the next step is basically going down and start measuring. Usually, you go and you measure what do we have, what is the situation right now, and then you tend to define what are the indicators that we want to measure. And then we have Fernando Luciano already listed a lot of those indicators that are the same that we are also using it. I will put an emphasis also, once you have the indicator, also to measure not just, let's say, now focusing maybe on gender diversity for a while, for a moment, not only also looking, okay, I have to capture, you know, how diverse is my workforce in the different level, but also trying to capture the indicator that help you tend to understand. For instance, it is a global partner that we have. If we look at this data of women representation at a different level, we tend to have a high percentage of women amongst the total workforce. Then we go a bit down in terms of junior management. We go a bit down in terms of senior management. There are some exceptions to this. But then, you know, why is this happening? Then it makes also sense, for instance, also to look at what is the percentage of women in a revenue-generating position. This is something that we don't think about, but you know, how many of the women workforce is linked to the profit and loss statement? Now, simplifying it.
That I think is the most important argument to foster the women participation.
Correct. And the second one, also, it was mentioned before, I guess, also the women in the technical position, so with the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, also those kind of things. Why those two capabilities, let's say, one, the link to the profit and loss statements, it means, you know, it enables within the company to better be identified. No, so you are unfortunately, so we have to say, you have more relevance if in a company, if someone sees, okay, you are doing something that helps to generate revenues, to reduce cost. And this is important to measure. And then the STEM, so basically the technical position, it is maybe, it's a way to measure capabilities to enable women and to do career and to achieve at C-level. There is an article that is public on our Sustainable One website. This is interesting. It's an analysis on all this data. It's something that I wasn't aware, but we did an analysis of the link, looking at the women at board level now that are present in the board of directors, and then, you know, basically the industry skill that they have. It came out that basically women that are in the board, so there's still low percentage of women that are in the board, they have on the other side very high skills in terms of knowing the industry. So it means that there is maybe a bias, you know, that we are not aware of, but it continues that in order for a woman to enter, you know, to that level, there is this need to demonstrate I'm capable of, no? You know, also with certain skills and so on. Otherwise, that's the reason why I stressed before how important it is to include in the board nomination policy. I also consider this element of gender and nationality, ethnicity, whatever it is, so that you are obliged. That's a way to take into account. Sorry,
thank you.
Go on.
So, sobre as mulheres nos conselhos, pegando o gancho aí do Ivan. Fernando, falando sobre o Conselho de Administração da Vivo, quais os critérios considerados para a composição do colegiado do órgão que governa a companhia?
A gente vem considerando diversidade de formação, diversidade de conhecimento, diversidade de gênero, de raça, de formação, e os critérios óbvios que a gente precisa considerar, que são conhecimento, comportamento, atitude, o nível de, a gente chama de readiness, ou de prontidão daquela pessoa para enfrentar o desafio e estar ali contribuindo de forma robusta dentro do Conselho. Mas a gente já vem considerando, a gente inclusive tem política de diversidade no Conselho, dentro do Grupo Telefônica e na Vivo, em que a gente leva esses pontos em consideração.
Algo que você falou que eu considero bastante importante são as competências comportamentais, né? Porque, às vezes, não só falando de conselheiros, mas falando de conselheiros também. Então, por exemplo, capacidade de argumentação. Então, não adianta se preparar para a reunião do conselho, aí um conselho de uma companhia aberta, como a Vivo, por exemplo, que tem uma documentação bastante robusta a reunião do conselho da Vivo é trimestral? Trimestral? trimestral. Então, se o conselheiro ou a conselheira se prepara, mas não tem a capacidade de argumentação, não consegue contribuir para o conselho. Outra competência comportamental que eu acho que é importante também é saber ouvir, né? Saber ouvir antes de expressar a sua opinião. Outra característica é saber tomar decisão, né? Em colegiado, então, quando não está muito confortável, dizer, ok, essa decisão não consigo acompanhar, mas, por favor, registre em ata, né? Então, ter a coragem também, como independente, que aí são 60 e poucos % de conselheiros. 86% de conselheiros, que bacana. E colocar aí a sua posição. Eu falo que ser conselheiro é bastante interessante, mas é bastante desafiador também, né?
A gente tem também, Ana, só complementando, uma avaliação que acontece de forma independente, ela é feita de 3 em 3 anos, de como é que está a composição do conselho, ou como é que está esse nível de interação, de conversa, de discussão. Então, a gente tem também, ou captura elementos muito importantes ali, porque não basta só definir por comportamento, ou por perfil, ou por diversidade, quem vai estar ali, mas a gente tem que primar para que aquele grupo interaja da melhor maneira possível para o bem da empresa, para o futuro da empresa.
Tá certo. Bom, Fernando, mais uma pergunta. Sabemos que a diversidade, com relação aos aspectos culturais, sociais e profissionais, deve ser considerada na composição do colegiado do Conselho de Administração, como você bem falou. Como a Vivo vem trabalhando essa questão e quais são os desafios que vem encontrando nessa jornada e como se dá aí a seleção de conselheiros, né? Não só conselheiras, mas conselheiros da Vivo?
A gente tem parceiros externos que a gente seleciona para nos ajudar na identificação dos potenciais candidatos, na seleção dos candidatos. E a gente tem feito isso não só para o Conselho, acho que também para fora, nível empresa, né? Então, a gente vem reformulando, retrabalhando os nossos processos seletivos, de novo, para evitar vieses. A gente tem hoje uma plataforma digital com inteligência artificial que consegue consolidar os currículos, as pessoas, né, que estão interessadas em se candidatar para as nossas vagas, e a gente vem garantindo, através de premissas, que a gente evita os vieses e que a gente oferece ali realmente oportunidades iguais entre homens e mulheres. Além do processo seletivo, processo de desenvolvimento de colaboradores, a gente está sempre olhando para que a gente tenha sempre uma equidade nas ofertas de desenvolvimento, também nos processos de remuneração. Saiu a lei agora, esse ano, em que a gente tem que primar pela equiparação salarial. A gente também está de olho nisso, embora a gente discorde um pouco da forma como foi feito, né, no fim ali, porque não reflete 100% a realidade da empresa, mas a gente tem consciência de que precisa olhar, gerenciar o tema, sempre buscando 100% de equiparação salarial.
Ok, obrigada. Ivan, more in general, what are companies expected to do after developing awareness on diversities to take action on inclusion?
Yes, this is taking action on inclusion. But, you know, there is sometimes really a bit different. But, you know, on diversity, we are collecting a lot of information, and this. Well, basically, here also collecting this data is not so easy. But, you know, it depends also a lot from the local legislation. For instance, we added, for the one that are familiar here with the methodology, up to a couple of years ago, we also included in the assessment also collecting data on other diversity, like LGBTQI+, like disabilities or age. And those elements, for instance, in Europe are protected. So theoretically, you know, a company is not allowed to ask when to the employees, what is your sexual orientation, what are your disability, and these kind of things. So this is only the reason why this question is not there anymore, why it was complicated then to compare. In US, it's totally normal. For instance, North America and Latin America depends a bit on the company. But on one side, first, once you have the data, it is important to use them properly, you know, basically. First of all, also, I would like to say, in the elements where then the human resources is taking action, so basically we see the main activities in terms of hiring, for instance, in terms of then measuring the level of engagement or in evaluating the turnover rates. It is important to be able to segregate those data also by diversity factor. It might be by age, it might be by gender, it might be by management, non-management level, it might be by race ethnicity. And this is interesting. Well, you know, if we look at this data, when we ask a hiring, you know, do you have the data of hiring broken down by this information? And then we see in terms of hiring and employee turnover, that usually age and management level they are considered. If we look on satisfaction, then it's more, let's say, age and gender. If we look, for instance, ethnicity is never considered. Those is less frequently and so on. So this is a first step. You know, inclusion means that then you are able to take action and then to improve. So basically, and then to improve the feeling that, you know, that every diversity is respected, and then it really empowers. You know, this is the very important part that has to do with inclusion, where you feel included, when you feel I really contribute. Also, thanks to my diversity factor that I have. It has to be followed by action. One of those easy one is really having the things and then starting to analyze the information. Second one, that they don't have the data, why it's impossible to measure in a methodology like this, is changing the culture of the company. Culture understood as the way that problems are solved. Here, it cannot be brought back, so within, let's say, financial industry, it goes the same way. It is not true. You know, the problem to solve are maybe similar, also for the clients, but if you go to one bank or to the other one, is that the culture of the bank as a client, as a customer, you feel, I go to this bank where I feel better treated, that is satisfy my expectation and so on. This is the way, this is the cultural part that has to be dealt, so to be really integrate this thinking on the day-to-day work. And then it means having trainings, having all the events, all the examples that were mentioned before by Fernando in the example of Vivo. And then the third level that it was highlighted to me here in Latin America a couple of years ago, it was so with having commitment and collecting data, the company generate expectations. Managing those expectations might be the elements that might be the most critical one. What you say, okay, let's assume, you know, we are diverse, we belong to one of those diversity, then suddenly a company said, okay, I have a policy for this diversity, I want to achieve this. And then you start collecting data, if you don't see actions, then it might be an issue. So the element, again, that it goes into direction inclusion, is really then not to wait too long or not to collect information and then do nothing. So basically this is the element that it was given. And then it was highlighted to me really in Colombia that, let's say, if we look within Latin America, maybe we discuss a bit on, without doing a generalization on behavior of different countries. But at least looking at the data that we have from the corporate sustainability assessment, in Colombia we have a higher level of women everywhere, of consideration of diversity and so on. But this Colombian company told me, for us it's a big challenge. Right now we have to deliver. So basically on what we promise, and then showing really that we change the business model, we integrate into the business model. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it takes more time. And then again, this is normal, but you know, again, being, let's say, aware of that, meaning that also if something is delayed or is not immediately or is not successful at the first phase, also to be transparent, at least internally, not to have an impact on the motivation of the employees.
So what you are trying to say to us is that in Latin America, Colombia is a winner in terms of diversity and inclusion in...
Yes, according to the indicators that we are
Okay.
measuring. In the CSA, you know, if we would calculate an average score on those indicators, Colombia would turn out. Well, you know, I guess from the nature that they have a higher percentage of women in the workforce population, but they lose less talent. If you want to calculate a talent retention level, let's say, if you do the proportion, women in senior top management position divided by the percentage of women in junior management position, which is an element how much women talent you lose on your career path, they lose less compared to Brazil is second, so by the way, but compared maybe to Mexico or other countries where there is a really a bit lower presence, so basically of women. And then interestingly, maybe on those differences, maybe I want to highlight here, maybe Renato, we are talking about this ratio. It is interesting to see, and this is a part of a global one, if we look by industry now, and then I did the statistic globally, and then I did also for Brazil for the sake of curiosity to see how is the situation here. You can notice that in this retention, basically the industry that have a lower percentage of women from the beginning in terms of total workforce, think about utilities, industrial, mining, energy, and so on, they tend to keep these low percentages, but they are constant at all the levels. So it seems that there is an awareness that, okay, we have few diversity in terms of gender, and maybe they care a bit more, but you see the same percentage is visible in junior management, senior management, top management, STEM, and so on, and so on, and so on. On the other side, this is global, as it's not now just Brazil. On the other side, if you look at the industry, where we have a high percentage of women in terms of total workforce, financial, healthcare are the top ones, so usually it's more than 50%, then there, the loss of women talents throughout the career path is very marked. So basically, you know, in financial, you start with 50% of women in total workforce, you go to junior management, you are 30-something%, you go to senior management, top management, you go down to 20-something. So it means you lose half of the pool of talents going forward. This is something that happens globally, but when I look at the statistic in Brazil, it's actually the same. Of course, Brazil has some differences. Certain industry, real estate here is more women-friendly, seems, in terms of percentages, also compared to the rest of the world. But you know, this is also a pattern that is interesting, maybe, to take into account.
Ok, thank you. Fernando, tem uma pergunta bastante interessante e desafiante para você. Existe uma barreira em empresas com C-level e conselho de administração mais tradicional. Se apegam na meritocracia, nas contratações, por exemplo. Como quebrar essas barreiras? Ué, não precisa ser meritocrático?
Tem
Como
razão.
vai dar o delivery?
Eu acho que a gente tem que estar muito seguro de que, ao longo do desenvolvimento, em todos os níveis, né, seja um estagiário, um analista, um consultor, gerente, etc., que a gente esteja oferecendo, e não só oferecendo, mas também acompanhando o desenvolvimento em todos os níveis. Se a gente está seguro de que a gente oferece as mesmas oportunidades, inclusive num momento de contratação, porque hoje 20% do bônus executivo ele vem de métricas ligadas ao ESG, a emissões de carbono e a mulheres em cargos de liderança. Nossa remuneração variável de curto prazo, nossa remuneração variável de longo prazo. Então, tem uma mensagem muito importante aqui, nesse sentido, do board da empresa para toda a companhia. E a gente, como área de pessoas, tem a responsabilidade de garantir que a gente está gerando pipe. E hoje, de forma muito consciente, se a gente encontra condições iguais de candidato homem, de candidata mulher, em função dos objetivos que a gente tem, a gente dá prioridade para a mulher. Se as condições são iguais, mesmo nível de preparação, mesmo nível de prontidão, a gente consegue direcionar para aquela mulher. A gente só não pode fazer isso, a gente só não pode ser irresponsável de promover uma mulher por meritocracia, acelerando, sendo que a gente tem um homem ao lado dela mais pronto do que ela. Então, e é uma discussão que precisa de tempo, viu, gente? A gente, por exemplo, no ano passado, 2023, nós lançamos 2.700 vagas exclusivas para os pilares de diversidade que a gente tem. O nosso programa Viva Diversidade foi lançado em 2018. A gente precisou de 5 anos para tomar essa decisão, porque é jornada, é maturidade. A gente precisa viver as situações, pensar, refletir, para depois tomar as decisões. Mas o mais legal é que a decisão tomada depois não tem mais volta. A gente segue em frente com ela, com coragem, com segurança, e a gente dessa forma vai mudando. Mas a meritocracia na Vivo, ela é sim considerada.
Uma outra pergunta. Você acha que o cuidado da Vivo com a governança e consequente empenho com a pauta de ESG impacta no posicionamento da empresa, além de ser uma operadora de telecomunicações?
Impacta, com certeza. A gente, hoje, tem 2 comitês de sustentabilidade. Tem um que é liderado pelo CEO da empresa, e ele tem como formação diretores executivos e diretores da empresa. Eu também faço parte desse comitê de sustentabilidade, e tem um segundo que é ligado diretamente ao conselho. Como eu comentei, o bônus executivo tem metas atreladas a ESG, e eu acho que a gente também já percebeu, Ana, que a gente vai muito além de uma operadora de telecom, né, no nosso posicionamento. E nesse sentido, o que a gente tem feito é tentar ir além do serviço core de telecom. Esse ano, a gente divulgou os nossos resultados do primeiro TRI, e os serviços digitais, e aqui a gente considera educação, saúde, serviços financeiros, consumer electronics, esses serviços digitais já representam 9,5% da nossa receita. Ano passado, em 2023, no mesmo período, eles representavam 8,6%. Então, a gente acredita que está se movimentando para além de uma empresa de telecom. Isso toca em muitas esferas, né? E ESG, para a gente, é base para tudo.
Ok, muito bom, parabéns. E sem contar com a distribuição de dividendos, né? Que na área de telecom, a Vivo está em primeiro lugar. Parabéns. Remunerar o acionista. Bom, Jean, agora uma pergunta para você. Based on the experience of CSA and Dow Jones Sustainable Index, how we can begin in-house program of diversity? How the companies, in your opinion, how the companies can begin a program of diversity in their companies?
Maybe thank you for the question from the audience, correct? Yes, that's good. Thank you very much. We are here, therefore feel free also to scream, so basically if you want. And yes, so first step is basically looking and taking a photography, you know, what the situation is right now. So basically in terms of diversity, not only gender, also the other diversities, of course. And then secondly, maybe thinking about, okay, what are we doing in terms of strategy, and then in terms of product and service that we sell on the market. Are they for which market? How diverse is that market that we are serving? And then, you know, and then starting already to compare, maybe you notice, oh, okay, we have a market that has this characteristic of diversity. We have inside of our company now, starting from the top, so from the board down to the management, down to the employees, we have this characteristic. Is this enough or exceeding or not enough? So basically to ensure that our strategy is able, basically in terms of developing product and service, to satisfy the need of the market that has certain characteristic. And then based on that, doing a kind of gap analysis, so basically in the respect, you figure out already what is missing, no? And this is the first step. This also benchmarking or comparing with an expectation. It can be done also using standards and international behavior, like your company, for instance, as a methodology, or comparing with peers. Then once you identify it and you see what is the best way also to enhance, and usually it starts also with defining, can I develop the skills in-house? So it means also having trainings, having exercise, also increasing the awareness, including it, also now in this case, in this example, maybe in product development, are we considering also those aspects of the diversity of the client base or potential market that are included. And then seeing it. If something then is not possible to be developed internally, then at this point, I see what was mentioned before, I have maybe to source externally also those missing skills, and then basically ensure that when in the process, in this case of hiring, so basically all these parameters are put at a high relevance, so basically so that basically, you know, we ensure that we get the skills that are missing, and then always keep on measuring and then comparing. So basically, this is from my modest perspective, from what I can take from the methodology, what it would be maybe a possibility also to go and then to close. Maybe we have.
So it's not just a question to install a program of diversity inclusion, but to measure in a year basis. Okay.
Yeah, and then be focused. So basically, also at the point, yes, of course, the policies they are broad, but then be focused. There may be an element that I didn't mention before on the implementation. Enable employees or stakeholders, also external one, to have the possibility to speak with the company. So basically, to have the channel open. Either it may be for grievance, which is the negative case if a policy, if there is the perception that something is not working as properly, but also just for suggestion. As is always having an open channel to collect the impression. What I was saying before, you know, so it's always not only for this specific topic, but in general. Once expectations are created, so it might be with an announcement, it might be with starting to collect certain data that we didn't collect before, or doing statements externally that were not done before. This creates expectations, and to ensure that there is the perception that these expectations then are met. And then one way to ensure and then to have a feeling of the expectation is to have an open channel where everyone feel free, so basically to provide is things. This is also a good way to collect also insights.
Another question. So the CSA, are you planning to use artificial intelligence?
That's a good question. Yes.
In what level? To make some analysis, critical analysis, to take some decisions?
Let's say, as of now, I was listening also to the panel before, and you know, with all the good, the big potential of artificial intelligence. As of today, so basically, we still collect information, let's say, manually, of course. So basically, of course, in order to collect information on the CSA, we have two possibilities. Either the companies themselves decide to provide the inputs, and then these inputs might be, the majority of information that we ask is public information, so providing where to find this information in the public domain. For certain topics like this one that we are discussing right now, we also ask company have also the possibility to provide non-public information. So basically that is used then for scoring on this element. So, and then also for the company that decides not to participate, while we assess up to 13,000 companies, we screen ourselves public information, but we do it manually, not with artificial intelligence as of now. I think with artificial intelligence, that I was listening before, but in my Portuguese is not so high level to understand everything. I think is where you source the data, of course. So basically, you can source, it facilitates a lot the screening. And then it was amazing, the example before of Diego Barreto, basically taking two pictures and then getting a story out of it, what we are doing and whatever. But then at the end, we have to take the decision, do we validate this data or not? So this is basically the decision that is taken when we evaluate a company, where everything in the framework is defined in advance. How to calculate a score is also defined, but really the step, we get the information, we have a guidance behind it, how this information is expected to be validated, and then comparing these two, we validate or not. Theoretically, we could, but then you really have to trust. You have to ensure that there are no bias. As of now, it is the human mistake is higher than the artificial intelligence, and not in the position to say. We still, at the moment, we trust a human being. So basically, for doing this evaluation, acceptable, not acceptable, the information. Maybe in the future there might be a support, so basically going from artificial intelligence.
Ok, thank you. Fernando, uma pergunta para você. As conselheiras, existem no Brasil muitas conselheiras preparadas. E a questão que elas vêm para nós é o seguinte, como entrar nos conselhos, né? Como nós ficarmos visíveis para sermos convidados para o conselho. O que acontece? O 30%, por uma questão de independência, a gente não tem uma lista de conselheiras, né? Quem tem essas listas são duas entidades bastante relevantes aqui no Brasil, que é o IBGC e também o WCD, o Women Corporate Directors. Agora, você como diretor de pessoas, qual a sua recomendação que você daria para essas conselheiras que às vezes não são vistas e poderiam, com certeza, agregar valor num conselho como o da Vivo ou de outras companhias do IBEST 100?
Eu acho que o networking é muito importante, eventos como esse que a gente está participando aqui. Eu vejo a atuação das conselheiras que a gente tem na Vivo, né? Eu já encontrei com elas em eventos, seja específicos das áreas em que a Vivo está ali trabalhando, ou seja, outros temas do mercado. Eu acho que a atitude também que você comentou, né, que precisa ter como comportamento de ir atrás de uma pessoa, de entrar em contato com um vice-presidente de recursos humanos ou com o CEO da empresa, se apresentar, se disponibilizar para uma conversa. Eu acho que isso tudo é muito importante. E a participação delas também, não só nas reuniões de conselho. A gente tem promovido algumas reuniões paralelas, por exemplo, o tema de cybersecurity. A gente tem uma conselheira que é fera no assunto e a gente criou um comitê paralelo em que ela participa junto com diretores, junto com gerentes, e é uma forma de estabelecer um contato novo. E ali começa. E aí essa pessoa, por exemplo, um gerente, um diretor que tem contato noutra empresa, e aí fala sobre essa reunião, vai falar sobre a atuação da conselheira e a coisa vai se expandindo. Eu acho que o network é essencial.
Ok. Algumas conselheiras chegaram para nós e sugeriram, falaram assim, olha, de repente, para ser, se uma conselheira é convidada para ser a titular, a que poderia substituí-la poderia ser uma mulher também. Mas isso, na prática, acaba não acontecendo. Você acha que isso poderia ser uma medida para promover o equilíbrio de gênero nos conselhos?
Eu acho que a gente deveria discutir várias medidas. Pode ser uma das medidas, eu acredito. Mas eu acho que a gente ainda está muito aquém do esperado. Então, talvez a gente precise de umas 5 medidas aí, além dessa.
Tá certo. Ivan,
or maybe may I add something on the topic here.
Please.
On the board. So basically, what is really important, and looking also maybe linking it to investor expectation. We know that corporate governance is one of the elements that is mostly looked at when investing in. And then it's also the one that we found out that the highest correlation with stock market return. So, and then looking now what are the trends, it is also a research that I'm taking from S&P Global Ratings that they did it recently. 2 elements that are coming out that are going to be very important in the future is the diversity of the board that we discussed already here, but it's also the second element, ESG competencies of the board member. So basically, it is important, for instance, cybersecurity, for a company that is very important. It is important to have also someone in the board that has the competencies of cybersecurity in order to approve, to sign, so to set a bit, to do this control job that the board it is supposed to do. And this is going also in terms of board structure to have this necessity to diversify. We are talking about diversity in terms of skills too. You know, so with sustainability, then we have cybersecurity is important. We have all the diversity, equity, inclusion, occupational health and safety. It is important. There should be also someone in the board that is accountable.
Innovation.
Innovation. Climate strategy that we mentioned also before. So you see that the task of the board member is really evolving to get used to manage, so basically different skills, and then also to do it. And here we have the control system that we have, is that we have investors, again, to link it with the investors that are becoming more vocal, and then they are less prone, so basically I assume, for instance, for a company like Vivo, so basically to think about, okay, it's a company dealing with a lot of data, you know, from customer privacy and so on, cybersecurity, do we have someone? If there is no one, and then at the next proposal for board member, if there is no one, they might be prone not to vote also for these members that are proposed without the skill. And then the second drawback, which is also interesting, that we are talking a lot about the capability physical now of the board member to manage all the tasks. And then the question is, does it make sense to have a board member that sits? The connection point is very important to get the skill, but there is also a limit how many other boards am I sitting in terms of board, in order to guarantee as the task of the board member are increasing. So sitting in 3, 4, 5, 6 different boards, how does it ensure that those persons so basically can do what she or he is supposed to do in terms of oversight.
Talking about the overboarding, do you think that is possible or is interesting for a board member to take part in 5 or 6 boards of directors? Do you think that's possible?
Okay, according
what do you recommend?
Yeah, according to the methodology, we limit to 4.
Oh.
For let's say, listed companies, put it away. Of course, we do not count if you are at the board of the school, of NGO, or this kind of thing. Let's say listed company, we have the limitation of 4, which is existing since a long time. I do not know now with this increase of the skills that are needed, or the time at the end that is needed for the board, we are going to reduce a bit. But it was set to 4 already 10 years ago. We said above 4. It's difficult to guarantee a sufficient engagement, so basically with all the tasks.
I fully agree. And if you compare to Europe, Latin America, and United States, what is the average of boards that each board member belongs?
Let's say in looking now at the data by heart is difficult to get, but we have usually above 4. Let's say is not the main part of the distribution. So basically, if we would do a normal distribution team number, we are around 4. So basically, we have 2 things. So one, if there is an official limitation, and then the real value, so basically the average, so basically of the other board, is seldom, I guess the majority of the companies are around 3, 4, as of now. Why we exclude, again, the board of the school, non-profit organization, all these kind of things. But this is thing. Now I would have to screen the data, so to have to be a bit more precise. Yeah.
In Brazil, the Brazil Institute of Corporate Governance, in the past they established 5 boards, but now they didn't establish any amount of boards. No, I think 4 is reasonable. No?
Okay.
O que você acha? Qual a sua opinião?
Yeah, I have a question for Ivan.
Yes.
With regards to the intersection, which is an expression that we use in diversity and innovation. I was discussing with some friends from Europe, and they were saying that the United States, they have more innovation than Europe in some aspects. I mean, launching products, launching new technologies, etc. And they say that there are 2 main reasons. The first one is related to the government and with the laws. I mean, the United States, they are known as, they're like incentivizing the companies, etc. And the second reason is regarding the diversity. I mean, there are lots of CEOs or board members that are out of United States. They're coming from Asia, Africa, Europe, etc. And then when we see the companies in some countries in Europe, or in the most of the countries in Europe, there's a lack of this diversity, and not only gender, but also race and other.
Yeah.
So, what do you say about that?
Yeah, this is true indeed. So this is, and it's also an important point why it is important also basically to ensure diversity at this level. What we saw, I can speak maybe from the European perspective, from practical, so personal point of view is not S&P Global right now. Indeed, what happened in Europe, the innovation was seen especially in technology. Well, you know, it's basically the field where the difference is more evident. It was always kept like a secret. If you look in Switzerland, pharmaceutical company, you know, if you go to the innovation side, you can never access. No, basically it's closed. So this is a knowledge is closed. The same was for technology companies and so on. What happened over the last 10 years, the company realized, and then they started opening up those campus for innovation. So first of all, to be open and visible, what it was done, which helped a lot already to create an awareness. Say here we are not working in a segregated, you know, in a closed area, to create innovation, but is accessible to everyone that want to install. And this started, it created a bit that startups and so on could install inside of this innovation campus of the larger company and started to contribute. And then secondly, this is starting to bring now, so maybe we see it now, also a bit more diversified pool of talents, so based on let's say it can be ethnicity, nationalities, and other characteristics, but indeed it is a bit lagging. We also see that sometimes you can compensate a bit this lack of things in the value chain. So basically, in the value chain where you are missing in the innovation that you do yourself in-house, you can say, okay, I don't want to do it, I do open innovation, either I let the other come in and then I purchase basically the outcome, or I let the supplier innovate and then integrate. This is also another way where sometimes European company compensate also this thing. But now we see maybe in Europe, also now looking at the city where I live in Zurich, so basically we have one of the polytechnical federal school, the Polytechnic, and there we see a lot of nationalities. If you grow through there, so in the school system, so basically it's starting really to be much more differentiated. This we hope that then it brings also that those people not go back to the countries they're coming from, but maybe they also stay, in this case in Switzerland or in Europe, and they start going to company. But we feel it that is lacking a bit in Europe, this culture, so from the, let's say, from the government, indeed, as you say, that is present in the US, to push for these things. It's also maybe needs a bit, you know, so maybe also from the background of the companies, I don't know if it has an impact or not. So in Europe, there are still many companies like in Asia that are controlled by families and so on. So maybe, you know, the board, of course, usually you have part of the board that is then is coming from a certain founding family and so on. Usually is good for the long-term value creation in general, as you have less fluctuation and more stability in terms of achieving the targets, but on the other side, it can be an impediment in innovating. And then looking again now just from the perception, now personal. If I look in Switzerland, the companies that do not achieve to go to the next steps, a lot of them, they used to be very high quality, very good family-owned company that then when there is a change, where, you know, the market requires other type of products and so on, then they are not ready so to take this, then either what happens, either they are sold or they are closed. And then it is really an issue that there is a lot of literature around on how corporate structure can impact on things. For the CSA, interestingly, we give a bonus to companies that have a stable shareholder things, also family owned. Why we think sustainability strategy per se, they require more time to be implemented therefore it is an advantage if you have a family, for instance, so behind it, that strive as to have long-term return, so basically generation-wise, so usually, instead of having shareholders that, every 2 years they want to see something implemented. On the other side, the drawback is the one that you highlighted very well right now.
Inovação, a gente deve considerar algo muito importante, né? O Brasil está piorando cada ano mais o índice de competitividade. Daqui a pouco não vai dar mais para ir atrás, né? E eu acho, e se você vê os MBAs dos Estados Unidos, 50% são dos chineses, né? Como eram os carros chineses, nem haviam, né? Agora são inovadores. São tecnológicos, né, na parte de combustível, a parte de design. Então, acho que inovação e comitês de inovação e tecnologia nas companhias, principalmente as do IBEST 100, é super importante. Algumas já têm, não sei se na Vivo já tem algum comitê de inovação e tecnologia, porque inovação também, para a Vivo, como as outras telecoms, é muito importante, né, investimentos em inovação.
Tem.
Fernando,
a gente tem a sorte, né, de contar com a Wayra, que é uma iniciativa de inovação aberta do Grupo Telefônica e da Vivo. Então, são 12 hubs em algumas cidades do mundo, e o hub aqui do Brasil fica em São Paulo. E a gente tem ali um country manager, tem uma equipe que é responsável por desenvolver novos negócios que tenham relação com o core ou não da Vivo. Então, a gente já está investindo em empresas de saúde, empresas de educação, e, recentemente, 2 anos atrás, a gente lançou o Vivo Ventures, que é um corporate venture capital, em que a gente aposta numa gama de startups, num estágio diferente da que a Wayra geralmente aposta. Então, a Wayra geralmente é early stage, e o Vivo Ventures Capital geralmente é um pouco mais avançado. E isso é muito interessante porque muda um pouco a forma como a gente atua, a forma como a gente discute problema ou dor de cliente da Vivo, de colaborador da Vivo, de áreas de negócio da Vivo. E a gente tem um programa também dentro que chama Vivo Shapers, em que a gente forma colaboradores da Vivo através da Wayra. É como se eles fossem embaixadores da inovação dentro da Vivo. Então, eles são inseridos em ambientes externos de desafio, conhecem startups, etc., e depois são responsáveis por tentar resolver problemas dentro da Vivo. Então, a gente aposta nisso e já tem mais de 10 anos que a gente está nessa jornada.
Parabéns. Gente, nós estou vendo aqui no prompt que a gente tem 4 minutos e meio, a gente está se aproximando do final, e eu gostaria que vocês fizessem uma mensagem final. Vamos começar com o nosso convidado internacional, né? Ivan, the final message, please.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe the message now, going back to the original topic on diversity, equity, inclusion, it is business relevant. This is very, very, very important to keep in mind. It's not something that you do for whatever reason, but it is important also to ensure basically that the company is able to generate value in the future. And this is for the reason, let's say there are 3 elements. So basically, a diverse mindset when taking decision helps a lot. Basically, otherwise we end up like the example that we mentioned before on the innovation side, you tend to close. So it's very important to have these diverse mindsets within the company. The second level is that, basically in the value chain, let's say, the customers that the company is addressing, but also the supplier and all the stakeholders around the company are diverse. So it's not only one gender, one sexual orientation, and so on. So it is important to be aware about that, and then to be ready to satisfy the changing needs that are coming also from the surrounding. And then the third point is really that it has an impact on generating business opportunity. We saw some better motivated employees that feel well within the company. They're way more innovative, so basically and open also to embracing what they feel, the company cares about me. So and I'm at my place and can deploy my knowledge as I like, and this brings a lot of advantages to the company. It also has to reduce a lot of risk, of course. So this is the opposite. So not being diverse or not caring, expose the company to certain risks that at the end, in the worst case, they might manifest in reputational risk. That we know a reputational risk, you know, it's more seldom to happen. It's not that it happens every day, but when it happens, it takes a long time to fix. You know, once the perception among the stakeholder change on something, then it takes a lot of time and money to deal with it, and therefore it costs less if you care before. So this is maybe the message here that I want to give.
Thank you for your participation. Fernando, a sua mensagem final, por favor.
Eu acho que um programa de diversidade robusto, consistente, é capaz de transformar uma companhia, e aí, independentemente do tamanho, da complexidade da companhia. Eu comecei a sessão convidando vocês a visitar a loja ou os escritórios da Vivo, e o próximo convite é que vocês conversem com os colaboradores da Vivo, vocês entenderem como é dinâmico, como é bacana de sentir, de vivenciar isso. E eu acho que não só ajuda na colaboração, na criatividade, mas ajuda também na atração, na retenção das pessoas. A gente tem programa de jovem aprendiz, de estágio, de trainee, em que parte das vagas, 50% das vagas, são destinadas para públicos específicos, ou seja, desde o conselho, que tem 33% de conselheiras mulheres, até o nível de diretoras, de gerentes, os níveis iniciais, a gente está mudando a fisionomia da empresa com essas iniciativas. E a gente acredita que os frutos já começam a ser colhidos, e isso é sustentável para muitos anos.
Muito bom. Bom, da minha parte, eu gostaria de agradecer à Abrasca e o IBRE pela oportunidade de nós podermos apresentar o 30% Club, e a gente espera aí atingir a nossa meta até 2026, e gostaria de agradecer aí o Ivan e ao Fernando também. Gostei, adorei esse painel, e espero que tenha contribuído aí com mais informações para vocês. Muito obrigada.